Welcome to Charity Village Connects. I'm Mary Barrell. Well, what a difference a few months make in politics. Canada has a new prime minister with the election of Mark Carney in yet another minority Liberal government. The closest competitor, the Conservative Party, lost after the evaporation of its massive 26-point lead in the polls, notwithstanding gaining its highest popular vote in decades, even while its leader, Pierre Poilievre, lost his seat, as did the leader of the NDP, Jagmeet Singh. All this in the shadow of Donald Trump and the existential threat of his tariffs on the Canadian economy, not to mention the continuing threat of annexation as the 51st state. But what now? And more importantly, for Canada's nonprofit sector, what will the outcome of the election mean? What are the anticipated policy shifts, funding implications, and what should nonprofit leaders be watching for in the months ahead? To help us navigate these important issues, we're joined by Mitzie Hunter, a dynamic leader with 30 years of experience working in the private and nonprofit sectors and in government. She was the first Black woman to serve as Ontario's Minister of Education. She was also Minister of Advanced Education and Skill Development and Associate Minister of Finance. Today, she's the president and CEO of the Canadian Women's Foundation and a respected advocate for women, girls, and gender diverse people across the country. Welcome to Charity Village Connects, Mitzie.
Thank you so much for having me, Mary. I really value Charity Village, so I'm really thrilled to be here on your pod.
Oh, that's so wonderful to hear. Thank you so much for that voice of support. Looking ahead, what key political or policy trends do you think nonprofit leaders should be paying the most attention to in the wake of the recent federal election?
I believe that nonprofits should be right at the table when it comes to policy development as we move forward. And we at the Canadian Women's Foundation recognize that 80% of the nonprofit sector workers are women. And so we are very keen to listen to what the sector is saying and to offer and lend our support where possible. We actually have just spent the last several weeks looking at the last 10 years and reflecting on the progress that we have made and how we ensure that we don't lose ground in any way. And in fact, we continue to advance the sector and the things that really make a difference to the lives of people in this country. So we recognize, as you said in your opening, that a day can make a big difference when it comes to politics and when it comes to even just the situation in the world. But we know what is constant is that people in communities will continue to need support from the services provided by the nonprofit sector. And it's important that we maintain a strong voice in that regard. So our research is publicly available and on our website, and people can access it any time. And one of the things that we at the Canadian Women's Foundation are very focused on is that gender lens. It's 51% of Canada's population, and it's important that we see that the social infrastructure across our country has investments, continues to be a vital part of our public realm. And think about it in terms of affordable childcare. This was a major policy shift that was brought on board in certainly in the last decade. It was fought for many decades, in fact, by the sector. But it's now here, and it's making a big difference in terms of women's labor force participation in the job market. And that's actually contributing to the gross domestic product of the country. And so we can see that that's a win-win in terms of public policy. It gives families choice in terms of participation in the labor market, and the labor market benefits as a result. Housing is also one of those other really critical sectors that affects people's affordability, where they choose to live and work, and we feel that should continue to be a priority. Decent jobs. And, I already mentioned that 80% of the nonprofit sector is women, and we want to see those decent jobs put in place, and that women have an equal access to those jobs so that they can, we can close that gender wage gap that we're very well aware of, and fair wages. Also, equal pay, that will go a long way. So these are some of the gendered issues that I feel is important at this time. We can't lose sight of that, despite the fact that we've made the gains, because women are part of the economy, a vital part of the economy, and no conversation should be happening about the economy without them at the table.
And I wonder if there are any specific promises or shifts in the new government's platform that you believe will shape the nonprofit landscape over the next years to come.
I do. And, for those of us who are keen on what's going on in the political realm, might have noticed that the Prime Minister, Mark Carney, just tabled mandate letters just yesterday. It's hot off the press, and of course available on the internet. So what Prime Minister Carney is saying is that his government was elected to stand up for our country and to build a strong economy that works for everyone. Canada's economic potential depends, I believe, on gender equality. There are so many aspects to this that we see, and women make up 51% of our population, but also a very significant portion of our labor force. It's around 46%. So there are still too many barriers that stand in the way of full economic participation, and those are areas that we want to see prioritized. So the government must continue to prioritize gender equality, not as a side issue, but as a fundamental issue of growth, innovation, and resilience. And the evidence is clear that when women and gender diverse people are thriving, our economy thrives. I was just out last night at a women's collective empowerment event. It was wonderful and fascinating in the room to listen to the conversation. And one of the speakers talked about when we invest in women, we invest in families, but we also invest in communities and in the health of those communities, and women give back. So this means that work of gender equality organizations like the Canadian Women's Foundation and those that we support their communities. They remove barriers. They become just all the more critical in a vibrant, healthy community. I want to give you a concrete example of adding gender lens to decision making. Whenever there is a crisis, an economic crisis, a health crisis like we had in the pandemic, any of those crises, even environmental, what we see is that there's a rise in gendered violence, and that affects women's safety. And so what we believe is that for emergency preparedness policies, that there has to be a gender lens. We have to ask the question explicitly, how will this crisis affect women, and address those in a direct way?
I'm curious as well. Certainly it's what you've just said, and in terms of women in the workforce and the importance and the role that they play. Certainly in the nonprofit sector, it's actually, the numbers are huge. I mean, we vastly are the majority in the nonprofit sector of workers are in fact women. I'm curious, from looking at, especially in the lens of what we've seen south of the border, this sort of retraction, a pullback away from equity, diversity, and inclusion. How do you expect the Canadian federal approach to gender equity, diversity, and inclusion to evolve under the current government? And how might that affect the work of women's organizations?
It's a really important question, because when Prime Minister Carney first took the role, there was sort of this immediate cabinet that was set up. Some called it a wartime cabinet because we were fighting the tariff war. But notably, the wage department, the Women and Gender Equity department, was missing at the table. This was the first time in over 50 years that there was not an explicit voice at the cabinet table. And I have to say that the you know this was a miss, and the sector spoke up about it and let our voices be heard. Other organizations as well throughout the country joined forces and said that this is not acceptable. There was an open letter signed by over 400 organizations. So, just a few weeks ago, with the new cabinet established, we see a full position at the table, and that shows that the government is listening, that the new prime minister is listening when we speak up. And that's an important signal for the sector to continue to let our voices be heard. And it's important that we have access at the table. And with Minister Richie Valdez, I know that if there are issues that come up, we have a person there that we can talk to, and that would understand where the sector is coming from. And this is this is important. It's important that our government listens and makes corrections. I know from being at those tables that you don't have all the information, and if I would give advice to nonprofits and their leadership, is to be bold and be direct with ideas, issues if you see them, but also with solutions, and work in that partnership and collaboration with government to get the things done that the sector is so well equipped to do, and to be that partner. And so we see that the key step towards progress made for gender equality and for diversity and inclusion, particularly in this global context that you've talked about, is that we have to make sure that we have a strong, bold voice, be prepared for any areas, and to really fight for that ground that was so hard fought for by generations who came before us. And so, I believe that sometimes things take time. They take decades, like we did for childcare, to see that as a national program. But we now have, like many other countries, a national action plan to end gender violence. And the provinces have been resourced to implement that plan. The federal government still has an oversight approach to that plan. And we want to see that move forward, because women, gender diverse people deserve that opportunity to thrive in this country. One of the ways that the government, and under Prime Minister Mark Carney, has promised to do that is by having a gender-based analysis, a GBA plus lens. So across departments, when decisions are being made, that we ask that gender question, which we know is so important to do, and that will give us assurance that we have a dedicated voice at the table. But across government departments, there's also the question being asked, because we know, being 51% of the population, that women's voices do matter, and the concerns that we have matter as well. And this is a time when there is great stress and crises, and we see that. And Canada has to be alert and alive to those, even the ones happening around the world. At the same time, we also, from our national interests, and where we see the country advancing, we have to be able to do that together and in partnership. And the role of the nonprofits in doing that is an extremely important one, and must have a strong voice at the table.
Well, first, congratulations for that very successful advocacy that you and your colleagues took on in ensuring that women's interests would be represented in the new cabinet. I'm curious, do you see any new risks or opportunities for organizations advocating for policy in this political environment?
I actually believe that now that the election is behind us, I feel like the temperature has come down a little bit. and that there is a window of opportunity for advocacy and for those ideas to come forward. So, risk is something that we have to manage, and whether or not governments are paying attention to the work that we do, we have to do this work because it's about making sure that our communities are healthy and who we represent is having voice. And as I said, sometimes that takes that persistent voice and that advocacy voice. And so, I know that those headwinds are still strong because of the economy and the risks to our economy with the tariff threats and just some of the global challenges that we're seeing. It affects markets, and consumer confidence, affects business confidence, affects employment, and that affects pressure that we feel on a social service sector that is oftentimes under resourced and over demanded in terms of its ability to meet the need. Totally get that. At the same time, we've got to look for those opportunities. And where can we make lasting change, systemic change? Where can we make improvements? And I still believe in that old adage, let's put the food bank out of business by the growth and the sharing that happens across our society. I would love to say the same for the work that we do at the Canadian Women's Foundation when it comes to ending gender-based violence. And that's why we have to, look for those opportunities. For instance, the government, as it's coming back just, next week, it is about what are those policies, maybe Bill C-63 that looks at online and digital harms. That's some research that we've just done, and we've seen that online is replicating some of those aspects that we don't want to see in society when it comes to digital harms and bullying and some of the vitriol that we're seeing anti women and gender diverse people. So how do we have policies and laws, frankly, that will protect and ensure that women, gender diverse people are as safe online as they are in the physical spaces? Those are just some of those opportunities from a new government forming, and if we can work to advance those issues and making sure that we continue to be heard and continue to have voice at the table, because ultimately at the end of the day the work that we're doing in the nonprofit sector is about strengthening families, strengthening communities, which strengthens frankly the economy and society overall for everyone.
I'm curious. I mean, we know the phrase, about any sort of election, the famous phrase, "It's the economy, stupid." Um, we know that Mark Carney was elected prime minister in large part because of his expertise in addressing and dealing with challenges that are economic in nature. And, part of that points to changes or, I guess, new directions in terms of federal funding priorities, in terms of what the government will have to tackle in the short term and longer term. What changes do you foresee in federal funding priorities, and how might these impact smaller grassroots organizations versus the larger national nonprofits?
And I get that, and there's a legitimate worry there for nonprofits that perhaps the new government will not prioritize some of the the focus areas that were there previously, and that can affect budgets for nonprofits. We know that it's already piecemeal and not enough to meet the demand, and so there's certainly a concern. I would say that that's why that bold coordinated approach right up front is something that I would recommend to be clear about the funding that is needed, as well as how this is going to be a solution. It is going to, in fact, reduce costs in the long run. And if we don't pay attention to these particular areas, then it's going to cost the government more with that delay. So making the case, and a solid case, an economic one, it will probably speak to this new government under Prime Minister Carney. And really, we've already established that the government is listening, which is a good thing. And we see that the government is able to pivot. And so we've got to really take those moments and bring those forward. Nonprofits cannot be expected to replace government in terms of funding. There just isn't the ability. In fact, there's no sector that can replace government. It's part of democracy, and having a government is collecting and aggregating funding coming from the one taxpayer, as we know, and setting the priorities against them. And so it's really important that the nonprofit sector be very, very clear, and maybe doing some prioritization of our own in terms of the focus areas that are really important and that are aligned with the direction that the Prime Minister has set, which is, we're going to grow the economy and we're going to do all of these things. Well, I certainly know the work that we do. Women are an integral part of the economy, and investing in women is an investment in the economy. And that's the argument that we will continue to make.
I'm curious what one policy file or issue area that you think isn't getting enough attention post-election, but will be critical for nonprofits and advocacy groups in the coming years.
Just one, Mary? I think that the care economy is one that I believe has, it has done quite a service. And when we think about the pandemic and we think about who we relied on, those that provided, personal care, hands-on work, braved all of the risks on our behalf while we stayed home. I do think it's time we turn our attention to the care economy, recognize it, and find ways to make sure that the pay, the working conditions are recognized and are boosted. And I believe that is something that is also in alignment with, if we have an aging population, looking at care from all sides and all aspects is something that needs and deserves attention. And I believe the returns will be invaluable across our society.
And I don't know this for a fact, but perhaps are the majority of people in the care aspect or the role within the nonprofit sector primarily women?
Yes, for sure. In fact, women provide the care, whether it's in paid or unpaid work, across our society. And so the majority of it. And so this is, we see this as an area that will boost and close that gap in gender pay gap that we see that's been so persistent. And so there's tremendous opportunity in that space as well. I'm so honored. I was asked to chair the sectoral table on the caring economy, which will explore all aspects of a national caregiving strategy. So still waiting for the new minister and the appointments, and now that the mandate letters have gone out, to hopefully recall the work so that we can begin in earnest to provide some good advice in that area.
I'm curious whether there are any emerging trends in coalition building or cross-sector collaboration. I mean, certainly you were part of that in the recent advocacy for having representation of support for women's issues within the cabinet most recently. But Are there any other emerging trends that you think will become more important under this new government?
I do, and I mean that's it was such a good example for the women's movement, that when we saw that there was a risk of losing that hard fought ground, that we had long fought for, and having a seat at the table. That the sector came together, over 400 organizations, and the government listened. And that type of coalition building, I believe, is something that we should continue to work towards. The $10 a day childcare is also a really important example. Many generations of women and advocates pushed for that over a long period of time, and the fact that it is now in place and we're starting to see the results of that, is just proof that these shifts and these investments do provide a return. I believe it's $32 billion in GDP growth that policy has brought forward in the last decade. Work across the sector, sit at many different tables. Imagine Canada brings us together. We do our own convening, and it's important that we continue to see that happen, convening within sectors, across sectors, and really sharing of that information. The federal's anti-racism secretariat and supporting Black communities fund is also an aspect that is making a difference to a specific community, making those much needed investments, closing that gap in terms of charitable funding that's going into programs that supports the Black community, which has been underfunded when it comes to charitable causes, and seeing areas like that continue to find space within the new federal government, and the new approaches that will be taken. I think it's really important. Working with organizations, labor organizations. I also find that women's voices amongst labor organizations has a strong place and a strong role, and whether that's advocating for childcare or the spaces in which the workers are in, I think that those are here to stay, and will continue to have voice. And so, that type of coalition building and advocacy has an important and a vital place in the Canadian political landscape, and I think that it's important that we continue to support in those aspects. I heard someone say, I think it was in the news, because of the one vote that was separating one of the MPs from taking their seat. And I thought about that, right? That's the beauty and the elegance of democracy, is that really the power is in the people and in the voters, and that individual who, feels that it is important to take that right and that power to exercise that right to vote. And there are many ways that people can let their voices be heard in and amongst their communities, in and amongst their workplaces, and across society. And the more that we do that, the more we get involved, the better it is. I'm sure you see that rise for Canada everywhere you go. You're seeing that everyone wants that united Canada, because all of a sudden we felt that, hey, our sovereignty, our democracy is at risk, and anything that we can do to bring the country together and to advance, I think it's really important. The economic agenda is really important. All provinces working together, that one economy, and within that space, I certainly know that our voice is going to be very strong about the role of women, and how we can continue to play a strong role in Canada's economy and for a strong nation.
With growing concern around misinformation and public trust, how can nonprofits who engage in advocacy work maintain credibility and influence an increasingly polarized political climate?
Facts. That's what I have to say. That it's facts that matter. We've got to look at the evidence, look at the facts. I also think that, things are changing so quickly and day to day. And sometimes you got to pull back from that and just, ground yourself in where you are at with your community, your workplace, your colleagues, things that are tangible and that you can actually see. We've done research on uh, what's happening in the digital space and in the digital realm, and some of the misinformation and the bullying and threats even that are happening in those spaces, it oftentimes it turns people off, and they decide that they don't want to be part of that anymore, and self-censure, and that's, on the one hand, yes, you're taking back that power of signing off, but on the other hand, you're missing what is happening online that could be beneficial, maybe even a job or some sort of economic opportunity. And so, we would rather see that those spaces are as safe and as respectful as physical spaces. And so our research, online digital harms, is actually one aspect of tackling some of that, misinformation and lack of safety, frankly, that is online. We've put together a course. People can find it at canadianwomen.org, so they can find out more about what is happening in the digital space and how can we make sure that it is safer for everyone.
Well, I wanted to actually address the recent report that you published about digital harm, and I'd like to know whether you could just give us, I guess, a high level summary of some of the findings in the report that you felt were the most important or impactful, and what nonprofit organizations should be aware of on this subject in particular.
Yeah, and I mean, it's something that is touching all of us, and by this report, we are able to call it what it is: online digital harms. Like, we now have a phrase. I've seen it in the news media that is really naming what this issue is that we're seeing on the rise and how it is affecting the lives of people. And from our research, there are really an imbalance in who is impacted: racialized people, Black, Indigenous people, to us LGBTQIA plus. People with disabilities, those visible as well as invisible disabilities, are disproportionately affected online in a harmful way and are being targeted, in fact. And so this online safety is as important as physical safety. We know that 71% of people experience some sort of online hate, and that's a huge number. And we want and they want to see that their governments are doing something about it, that businesses and tech companies are held accountable for this. And so this is an important part of how we talk about it, by really identifying it, that it's a significant problem, because we don't want to see what's happening online spill over even more dangerously into the physical world. And we were able to look at this on a national lens. It's disaggregated as well, so it's really telling us who is most impacted. One of the key findings is that half of women reduce their online presence and self-censor to avoid harm, and this is, as I said, is going to affect their participation economically. The report also, I think, importantly for nonprofits, I want to go into that because I think the listeners will really relate. I know that when I saw the research, I related to it, having worked in the nonprofit. 88% of gender equality organizations face digital threats: hacking, harassment. We've all heard of those Zoom bomb moments that happen online, and 82% focus on gender based violence. So, those who are focused on those who are most vulnerable are facing those threats online. And yet, more than 60% don't have the resources to address this. You need to consider the impact on our organizations of this online harm. Staff members who have to interact with this negativity and this hate, this vitriol, that affects their mental health and their well-being. And so organizational leaders have to really ask that question, and how are we protecting people online? I have spoken to organization leaders who have opted out of some platforms because they were not able to protect their staff from all of the hate that, oftentimes staff are the ones that have to go in and take down different posts, and that exposes them to that type of harm. And so addressing gender digital harm requires that intersectional lens, that human rights focused lens, and survivor centered approaches and collaboration across sectors. I would also say trauma. And as I speak about this in settings, what I notice is that oftentimes it does resonate with people who have had these experiences and are now able to call it what it is and to recognize that this is wrong. Because sometimes our research has shown that people just took an approach of really like putting on armor or numbing themselves to those threats online. And that doesn't last forever. At some point, it's going to affect people's well-being. And from our research, we see that it's the mental health and the well-being that is so impacted. And so we have to continue to advocate. We also have to take our own responsibility for learning. And we have an online course that's available at canadianwomen.org. It's free for those to access. I've signed up for it myself. I'm doing the modules and really learning about the terminology, learning when to identify it. And I really encourage others to go on and access this resource, this tool, to keep themselves and those around them as safe as possible while online.
Well, that's such an important project. And, the statistics you've just spoken about are really stunning and really disturbing. What a great tool to offer the public, and especially those working in the nonprofit sector. Thank you for that. I'd like to wrap up by asking you, from your perspective, what should nonprofit leaders be doing now to position their organization strategically for the year ahead? In particular, I guess, in the context of advocating for themselves and for their missions with the new federal government, or more generally?
So nonprofits should, I believe, see themselves as a vital part of the Canadian economy, of the political landscape, and really prioritize the issues, because we can't do everything. And I can hear that signal from this current government that's not going to do everything. So prioritize the issues, those that are most important, most impactful, provide the solutions, and how you will work in partnership with government to solve those issues, and what the difference is that it's going to make for people. And don't do it alone. Work with others. And we see that when we work with others and we're clear about the issues, that the government listens. I also want to say, as a nonprofit leader, your team is important as well, and making sure that you check in on your team. How are they doing, their wellness? Because oftentimes they're at the front line. They're at the front line of the issues that we're trying to solve, and they might have their own worries about what's happening in the current economy, and with the various threats that might be affecting them as well. So checking in on each other, I think, is something that is really important. And so, the job is ahead of us. It's I want people to have a sense of hope even in these very difficult times that we are in, and know that we are in this together and you're not working alone. And I really want to say thank you to Charity Village for giving us this platform for charities and for nonprofits to really dive into the issues, learn from each other, and to let our voices be heard.
Well, Mitzi, it's been such a pleasure speaking with you and hearing your important insights on the present as well as the future challenges facing the Canadian charitable sector in these very uncertain times. And it's been just a pleasure to be able to engage with you on these important issues. Thank you for joining Charity Village Connects.
Thank you for having me, Mary.